The morning sun peeked through the cloudy sky as Rose wiped down the counter at Sunnyside Diner. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of cleaning supplies. She had been on her feet since 5 a.m., her third, early shift that week. At 28, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, she looked older than her years. "Order up," called the cook, sliding 2 plates of steaming breakfast onto the pass-through window. Rose grabbed them with practiced hands, balancing them expertly as she navigated between the crowded tables. Her faded blue uniform had a small coffee stain, near the pocket. There hadn't been time to wash it properly after yesterday's double shift. "Here you go, folks. Enjoy your meal," she said with a genuine smile that somehow still reached her tired eyes. The businessman barely looked up from his phone, while his companion at least offered a quick "thanks" before diving into her eggs. That was how most mornings went at the busy diner in downtown Portland, a blur of faces most attached to people who looked through her rather than at her. Rose didn't mind much. She had bigger worries than being invisible to strangers. Last night she had sat at her tiny kitchen table until midnight, bills spread before her like a depressing puzzle she couldn't solve. Her mom's newest medical bills had arrived, another $340 that the insurance wouldn't cover. The old Chevy she drove was making a strange noise that would probably cost at least $600 to fix. And her landlord had slipped a notice under her door, warning of another rent increase next month. Rose tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and refilled coffee cups down the counter. Her hands were red and cracked from constant washing, from the industrial-strength cleaning solutions from the winter cold. She couldn't afford nice hand cream, so she used the cooking oil from her kitchen sometimes, which helped a little. "You're limping again," noted Deb, the other waitress on morning shift. Deb was in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Just a little sore," Rose shrugged. "Did an extra 4 hours covering for Penny yesterday." What she didn't say was that she needed those extra hours desperately. Every dollar counted when you were sending half your paycheck to your mother 3 states away. The bell above the door jingled. Rose glanced up automatically and checked her watch. 7:15 on the dot. Some things you could set your clock by, and the old blind man was one of them. He shuffled in slowly, one hand gripping a worn wooden cane, the other outstretched slightly to feel his way. His coat was clean but threadbare, his shoes practical but scuffed with age. Thick glasses covered his eyes, and his white beard was neatly trimmed, suggesting he hadn't always lived on the edges of society. "Morning, Mr. T," Rose called out, already pouring a cup of coffee. The other waitresses called him that blind beggar, or the charity case, but Rose had given him the nickname Mr. T after he'd once mentioned his name was Thomas. He always sat in the same corner booth, the one with the wobbly table that most customers avoided. "Good morning, young lady," he replied, his voice surprisingly warm and clear for someone who looked so frail. "Is that your lovely voice I hear?" Rose guided him gently to his regular spot, placing his hand on the table edge so he could orient himself. "It's me. Busy day ahead?" It was their little joke. As far as Rose knew, Mr. T didn't have anywhere to be, but he always played along. "Oh, terribly busy. Very important meetings," he chuckled, settling into the booth. "The usual, please." The usual was just coffee, which was all he ever ordered. But not today. Rose glanced around quickly. The manager was in the back office doing inventory. Deb was busy with a large family that had just come in. Moving swiftly, Rose went to the kitchen and grabbed a plate, adding 2 eggs, toast, and a small portion of potatoes. "Hey," the cook frowned. "Who's that for? I don't see a ticket." "Just put it on my tab, Joey," Rose said quietly. Joey shook his head but didn't argue. It wasn't the first time, and they both knew it wouldn't be the last. When Rose placed the full breakfast in front of Mr. T, his face lit up with surprise. His hands carefully explored the edges of the plate, mapping its contents. "I can't accept this," he whispered, though his stomach growled loudly enough to betray his hunger. "It's just leftovers that would go to waste," Rose lied smoothly. "Boss hates throwing food away." They both knew it wasn't true. The $7.99 for the breakfast special would come out of her own pocket, nearly an hour's worth of her wages after taxes. But Rose had been in spots before where a single act of kindness would have made all the difference. The world had rarely shown her that kindness, so she tried to put it out there herself. Mr. T's weathered hands trembled slightly as he carefully cut the eggs. "You're a good soul," he said softly. "Not many would bother with an old man like me." Rose refilled his coffee cup. "The world's got enough coldness in it," she replied with a small shrug. "Besides, you'd listen to me better than my cat does." And listen he did. As she checked on him throughout her shift, she found herself sharing bits of her life. Her dreams of finishing the college degree she'd started years ago, her worries about her mother's health, the small victory of finding a quarter in the parking lot that morning. Mr. T nodded thoughtfully at each story, offering simple wisdom that somehow made her burdens feel lighter. "Your kindness is an investment," he told her, as he carefully counted out coins for his coffee. There was never enough for a proper tip, but Rose would never dream of making him feel bad about it. The universe has a way of balancing accounts. Eventually, Rose smiled as she collected his cup. "Well, the universe is running a bit behind on my account, but I'm not keeping score." As Mr. T prepared to leave, tapping his cane to find his way, Rose noticed something she hadn't spotted before. A man in an expensive suit sitting at the counter, watching their interaction with unusual interest. When he caught her eye, he quickly looked down at his newspaper, but something about his gaze left Rose feeling uneasy. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. T?" she asked, helping the old man with his coat. "God willing," he replied with a gentle smile. "You know I wouldn't miss our conversations for anything in the world." What neither of them realized was how much truth that simple statement contained, or how dramatically their lives were about to change. The well-dressed man at the counter folded his newspaper precisely, tucking it under his arm as he left a generous tip beside his half-empty coffee cup. His name was Howard, and while nobody at Sunnyside Diner knew it, he controlled more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. As CEO of Pinnacle Investments, he managed billions in assets and made decisions that affected thousands of lives daily. Yet for the past 3 months, he'd found himself drawn to this ordinary diner, watching the extraordinary interactions between a struggling waitress and a seemingly homeless blind man. Howard checked his platinum watch, a gift from his board of directors last Christmas, and frowned slightly. He was late for a meeting, but somehow these morning observations had become more important than the endless parade of boardrooms and balance sheets that filled his days. "Fascinating," he murmured to himself as he stepped out into the chilly morning air. The kindness he witnessed each day was something his money couldn't seem to buy in his own life. Back inside, Rose wiped down Mr. T's table, wincing as she bent to retrieve a fallen napkin. Her back ached from the double shift yesterday, but there would be no rest today. After finishing at the diner at 2 p.m., she'd head straight to her second job cleaning offices until 8. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the latest crisis looming. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Normally she wouldn't check it during her shift, but her mother had been having a rough week, so she glanced at the screen quickly. It was worse than she feared. The text from her mother's neighbor read, "Doctor says new medication needed. Insurance won't cover. $630. Your mom didn't want to tell you." Rose's stomach tightened into a painful knot. $630 might as well be $6 million. She had exactly $147 in her checking account, and rent was due next week. "Everything okay?" Deb asked, noticing Rose's pale face. "Fine," Rose answered automatically, tucking the phone away. "Just fine." But nothing was fine. Later that afternoon, as Rose walked to the bus stop after her diner shift, the sky opened up. The rain soaked through her thin jacket in minutes. She'd forgotten her umbrella, and the weather seemed determined to match her mood. The bus was late. When it finally arrived, the driver announced that the route was being detoured due to flooding on Main Street. The detour would add 20 minutes to her commute, making her late for her evening job. Rose closed her eyes and leaned her head against the cold window. Sometimes it felt like the universe was piling on, seeing just how much she could take before Breaking. By the time she reached the office building, she was 30 minutes late. Her supervisor, a tight-lipped woman named Vera, was waiting with crossed arms and a clipboard. "This is the second time this month," Vera said sharply. "We have schedules for a reason." "I'm sorry," Rose began, explaining about the bus detour. Vera cut her off with a raised hand. "Look, times are tough. The company is cutting back. We need reliable people." Rose knew what was coming before the words left Vera's mouth. "We're going to have to let you go. Tonight will be your last shift." The words hit like physical blows. Her second job, gone. The one that paid for groceries and utilities, that kept her phone connected so her mother could reach her. Rose worked through her last shift in a daze, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks while fighting back tears. On her way out, Vera handed her a final paycheck, smaller than usual because of the missed hours. The rain had stopped by the time she headed home, but the world still felt dark. Her tiny apartment was cold. She kept the heat low to save on bills, and her ancient refrigerator hummed loudly in the quiet space. Opening it revealed pathetically empty shelves, half a carton of milk, some wilting carrots, a single egg. Dinner would be toast again. Rose sat at her small kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible numbers work. Even if she picked up extra shifts at the diner, even if she sold her mother's old wedding ring that she'd kept as an emergency fund, she'd still come up short. Her cat, an orange tabby named Lucky, jumped onto her lap, purring loudly. She'd found him as a half-starved kitten behind the diner last year. He was the only reason she wasn't completely alone in the world. "What are we going to do, Lucky?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. Rose barely slept that night. When her alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., her eyes were gritty with exhaustion. She dressed mechanically in her diner uniform and caught the early bus. The morning rush at Sunnyside was particularly brutal. A convention was in town, filling every booth with impatient customers. The cook called in sick, leaving Joey overwhelmed and behind on orders. 2 coffee pots broke in quick succession, and a child spilled orange juice all over Rose's shoes. By the time 7:15 rolled around, Rose was running on fumes. But some habits were sacred. She glanced toward the door just as Mr. T tapped his way inside, his familiar figure a strange comfort in her crumbling world. "Your usual spot's waiting," she called out, her voice carrying a warmth she didn't think she had left in her. As she guided him to his booth, she noticed his clothes looked even more worn today. There was a new tear in his coat sleeve, and his shoes were soaked through from puddles. Without a second thought, Rose headed to the kitchen and put in an order for a full breakfast. Today she added bacon, a small extravagance that would cost her extra, but something told her Mr. T needed it as much as she needed to give it. "Don't even start," Joey said before she could speak. "I already rang it up on your employee meal. Just this once." Rose blinked back sudden tears at the unexpected kindness. "Thanks, Joey." When she placed the steaming plate in front of Mr. T, his face creased into a surprised smile. "I smell bacon," he said, his voice reverent. "Special today," Rose said, pouring his coffee. She sat down across from him for just a moment, a brief rest for her aching feet. "You're troubled," Mr. T observed, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond words. Rose sighed. Somehow it was easier to talk to this stranger than anyone else. "Lost my second job yesterday. Mom needs expensive medicine, cars making, noises that sound expensive. You know, the usual dance." Mr. T nodded slowly, his weathered hands cupping the warm coffee mug. "Life has seasons, my dear. Even the harshest winter eventually yields to spring." "Winter's been awful long this time around," Rose said with a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. From his seat at the counter, Howard watched their interaction intently. He'd heard every word, and something about the genuine connection between these two unlikely friends stirred something long dormant in him. He pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "I need information on someone," he said quietly. "A waitress at Sunnyside Diner." What Rose didn't know as she refilled coffees and collected tips that wouldn't begin to cover her troubles was that the wheels of fate had already begun turning. The next 24 hours would change everything she thought she knew about kindness, struggle, and second chances. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm clouds hanging over Rose's life. She'd spent the night making desperate phone calls, to her mother's doctor begging for sample medications, to the electric company requesting another extension, to former classmates who might know of job openings. The results had been disappointing at best. Her ancient alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m. as usual. Rose reached to silence it, noticing the strange stillness outside. No rumble of early morning traffic, no distant sirens, just quiet as if the world was holding its breath. "Going to be one of those days?" she murmured to Lucky, who stretched lazily across her pillow. She scratched his orange head before forcing herself out of bed. The old Chevy refused to start. After 15 minutes of trying, Rose gave up and began the long walk to the bus stop, her thin jacket offering little protection against the morning chill. The first bus wouldn't come for another hour, which meant she'd be late for her shift. By the time Rose pushed through the diner doors, her face was flushed from hurrying and her hair wind-blown. "You're late," said the morning manager, a balding man named Pete who took secret pleasure in pointing out others' failings. "My car," Rose began. "Save it," Pete interrupted. "Just clock in and get to work. Table 6 has been waiting 10 minutes for coffee." Rose swallowed her explanation and frustration, hanging up her jacket and tying her apron with practiced movements. The morning rushed by in a blur of coffee refills, dropped plates, and impatient customers. Her head pounded from lack of sleep, and a constant knot of worry tightened in her stomach. As 7:15 approached, Rose found herself watching the door. Mr. T's daily visit had become an unexpected anchor in her chaotic life. But the minutes ticked by, 7:20, 7:30, and the familiar tap of his cane didn't come. By 8:30, Rose felt a strange emptiness, a worry that went beyond her personal troubles. In 3 months, Mr. T had never missed a day. What if something had happened to him? With no address or phone number, she had no way to check on him. "Looking for your charity case?" Pete asked with a smirk as he passed. Maybe he found another sucker to feed him. Rose ignored the comment, focusing instead on a new group of customers that had just arrived. At 9:45, just as the morning rush was slowing, the bell above the door jingled. Rose looked up automatically, her heart lifting at the familiar sound of a tapping cane. But what she saw made her freeze in place, coffee pot suspended in midair. It was Mr. T, but not as she'd ever seen him before. Gone were the threadbare coat and worn shoes. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored gray suit with a blue tie, his white hair neatly combed and his beard freshly trimmed. Most shocking of all, a young man in a dark suit walked beside him, not guiding him but seeming almost to follow his lead. The diner fell strangely quiet as Mr. T made his way to his usual booth. Without the glasses that usually covered his eyes, Rose could see they were a clear, piercing blue, and they were looking directly at her. "Good morning, Rose," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now silent diner. "Mr. T?" she managed, still frozen in place. "Thomas," he corrected gently. "Thomas Blackwell." Rose finally remembered to set down the coffee pot. She approached the booth cautiously, as if he might disappear if she moved too quickly. "You can see," she said, stating the obvious. Thomas smiled. "I've always been able to see, my dear, just not in the way most people think of sight." Rose slid into the seat across from him, her legs suddenly unsteady. "I don't understand." Thomas gestured to the young man who had accompanied him and who now stood respectfully nearby. "This is my assistant, David, and I believe you've noticed Howard watching us these past months." On cue, the well-dressed businessman from the counter appeared, nodding politely to Rose. "What's going on?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The diner had resumed its normal buzz of conversation, but several customers were watching, their table with undisguised curiosity. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. "I need to tell you something important, Rose. I'm not who you think I am." He paused, his hands folded neatly on the table. My name is Thomas Blackwell. I'm the founder of Blackwell Technologies and… He hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. I'm a billionaire. Rose stared, certain this was some kind of elaborate joke. She looked from Thomas to Howard and back again, searching for the punchline. I don't understand, she repeated. Why would you pretend to be homeless? Blind? Thomas sighed, his expression sobering. 8 months ago, I was diagnosed with a condition that doctors believed would soon leave me blind. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that all the money in the world can't buy the things that truly matter. He gestured for Howard to join them. As Howard slid into the booth beside Thomas, Thomas continued. I wanted to experience life without the shield of wealth and privilege, to see how people would treat me if they thought I had nothing to offer them. His voice softened. I visited dozens of establishments over 3 months. I was ignored, asked to leave, even harassed. Until I found this diner. Until I found you. Rose's mind raced, trying to process this impossible revelation. But your clothes, the way you moved, all part of the role, Thomas acknowledged. Method acting, you might say. The persona was fictional, but the lessons I learned were very real. Howard spoke for the first time, his deep voice surprising Rose. I've been observing as well. Thomas and I are old friends and business partners. When he told me about his experiment, I was skeptical. I wanted to see for myself what he was experiencing. Rose's cheeks flushed as understanding dawned. So you've both been, testing me? Playing some kind of game? Not a game, Thomas said quickly, reaching across to touch her hand briefly. In a world where kindness is increasingly rare, you showed compassion without expectation of reward. That's something money can't buy. But your eyes, Rose persisted. You're not going blind? Thomas's smile returned, brighter than before. That's the most remarkable part. 3 weeks ago, I began an experimental treatment. Yesterday, my doctor confirmed what we'd hoped. The condition has reversed. My sight is no longer in danger. Rose's gaze dropped to the table, emotions warring within her. Relief that Mr. T wasn't truly blind or destitute, confusion at the elaborate deception, and a strange sense of betrayal that their entire relationship had been built on false pretenses. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. Then perhaps you could listen, Thomas suggested gently. Because while I may not be the person you thought I was, your kindness was real, and I'd like to repay it if you'll let me. Pete appeared, suddenly at their table, his earlier smugness replaced by obsequious attention as he recognized the well-dressed visitors. Is everything all right here? Can I get you gentlemen anything? Our best table is available if you'd prefer. Everything is perfect right where we are, Thomas interrupted smoothly, and we'll need privacy for the next half hour. Rose will be taking a well-deserved break. Pete's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water before he nodded and retreated, throwing a confused glance at Rose. Now, Thomas said, turning back to Rose with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. Howard and I have a proposition for you, one that I think might change both our lives for the better. Rose looked between the two men, still not quite believing what was happening. Outside, the sun broke fully through the morning clouds, streaming through the diner windows and illuminating their booth in golden light, like a spotlight on a stage where an extraordinary scene was about to unfold. Rose wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, trying to stop them from shaking. The past 15 minutes had turned her world upside down. The homeless blind man she'd been helping for months was actually a billionaire. The quiet businessman at the counter had been watching her all along. And now they both sat across from her, looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. A proposition? She repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas nodded, his eyes, those surprisingly clear, seeing eyes, focused intently on her face. Before I explain, I'd like Howard to share what he's observed these past months. Howard cleared his throat, straightening his already perfect tie. In my position, I've learned to read people quickly. It's a necessary skill when billions are at stake. His voice was formal but not unkind. "I've watched you interact not just with Thomas but with everyone who comes through that door." Rose shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Just doing my job." "No," Howard said firmly. "What I've seen goes well beyond just a job. I've seen you remember the names of children who visit once a month with their grandparents. I've watched you slip extra napkins to the college student who always has a runny nose. Last week you helped an elderly woman count her change for 10 minutes without a hint of impatience." Rose felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed these small gestures. "And," Howard continued, "I've seen you share your employee meal with a man you believed was homeless even though you yourself often skip lunch." Thomas leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "What Howard is trying to say in his rather formal way is that you possess something extraordinary, genuine empathy. Not the kind people pretend to have when it benefits them, but the real thing, the kind that acts without audience or reward." The diner bustled around them, but in their booth a strange bubble of quiet had formed. Rose glanced at her watch. Her break would be over soon, and Pete would be looking for her. "Still don't understand what this has to do with me," she said finally. Thomas exchanged a look with Howard before continuing. "For the past year we've been developing a new initiative, the Blackwell Foundation for Community Support. Its mission is to help people who have fallen through the cracks of traditional support systems. People who work hard but still can't get ahead. People like me," Rose finished for him. "Yes," Thomas acknowledged, "but the foundation needs someone special to help lead it. Someone who understands struggle firsthand, who knows what it means to work multiple jobs and still come up short, who recognizes the difference between charity that helps and charity that hurts." Howard pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between them. "We've done some research on you, Rose, hope you don't mind." Rose's eyebrows shot up. "You investigated me?" "Standard procedure," Howard said, not looking the least bit apologetic. "We needed to know if you were the real deal." "And?" Rose asked, a hint of defiance in her voice. Thomas smiled. "And everything we found confirmed what we already knew. Community college dropout not because of grades, but because you couldn't afford tuition after your father passed away. 2 jobs to support yourself and help your mother with her medical bills. 3 volunteer shifts monthly at the senior center. Despite your exhausting schedule. No criminal record, excellent credit score despite financial hardships." Rose felt oddly exposed, as if these strangers had leafed through her diary. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Howard opened the folder, revealing what looked like an employment contract. "We want to hire you as the Community Outreach Director for the Blackwell Foundation. The position includes a starting salary of $120,000 annually, full benefits including premium health care that would cover your mother's condition and a scholarship to complete your degree in social work." Rose stared at the contract, certain she had misheard. "100 and that can't be right." "It's actually on the low end for an executive position," Thomas said gently. "But there's room for growth as the foundation expands." Rose shook her head, overwhelmed. "But I'm not qualified. I don't have a degree. I've never managed anything bigger than this diner during night shift. Traditional qualifications are overrated," Thomas said with a dismissive wave. "We're looking for something that can't be taught in any university, authentic empathy coupled with practical wisdom. You understand what it means to struggle. You recognize need without judgment. You solve problems with limited resources. These are the exact qualities our foundation requires." Rose looked down at her hands, red and chapped from work, nails cut short for practicality. Not executive hands, not the hands of someone who earned 6 figures. "This feels like a fairy tale," she murmured. "The kind where you wake up and realize it was just a dream." Howard's usually serious face softened slightly. "I assure you this is very real. The contract is ready for your signature, pending any questions or concerns you might have." Rose's mind raced with practical worries. "But my mother, she needs me. I can't just move away." "The foundation headquarters will be here in Portland," Thomas explained, "and the healthcare coverage would begin immediately upon your acceptance. Your mother could see specialists, receive better treatment. We could even arrange for her to relocate closer to you if that's what you both want. A thought struck Rose, making her pause. Why me? Really? There must be thousands of people with my background but actual qualifications. Social workers with degrees. Non-profit experts. Thomas exchanged another look with Howard before answering. When I started this experiment, I wasn't just testing others. I was testing myself. I wanted to know if I'd become so insulated by wealth that I'd lost touch with humanity. He gestured around the diner. Most people looked right through me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. But you saw me. Not as a potential business connection or a charity case, but as a person worthy of kindness and dignity. Thomas's voice grew quieter, more intense. The foundation needs that kind of vision. We don't want another bureaucracy that processes people like numbers. We want an organization that sees the human behind every application, that recognizes the dignity in everyone who walks through its doors. Rose was silent for a long moment, the weight of the opportunity settling over her. I'd need time to think, she said finally. It's too big to decide right now. Of course, Thomas said, pulling a business card from his pocket and sliding it across the table. Take all the time you need, but there is one more thing. He nodded to Howard, who reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a check. When he placed it on the table, Rose's eyes widened at the amount, $50,000. What's this? She asked, not touching it. Consider it a signing bonus, Thomas said. Regardless of your decision about the position, this is yours. It's not charity. It's repayment for reminding an old man what truly matters in life. Rose stared at the check, emotions warring within her. Hope, suspicion, gratitude, fear. The amount would cover her mother's medications, pay off her debts, fix her car with plenty left over. I can't just take this, she whispered. You can, Thomas said firmly. And you will, because kindness, when no one is watching, reveals character, and character is what builds lasting change. From behind the counter, Pete cleared his throat loudly, pointing to his watch with an exaggerated gesture. Rose's break was over. I should get back to work, she said, standing up slowly, still dazed by everything that had happened. As she moved away from the booth, Thomas caught her hand gently. Rose? She turned back, meeting his gaze. Whether you accept our offer or not, thank you for showing an old cynic that goodness still exists in this world. That alone is worth more than any check could cover. Rose nodded, unable to find words. As she returned to her duties, the check and business card burning a hole in her apron pocket, she felt as if she were moving through a dream, a beautiful, terrifying dream filled with possibilities she had never dared imagine. 6 months later, Rose stood at a podium, nervously adjusting the microphone. The crowd gathered before her was bigger than any she'd ever addressed, nearly 300 people, including local officials, community members, and reporters from several news outlets. Behind her, a large brick building gleamed in the spring sunshine, its fresh paint and new sign proudly announcing Blackwell Community Center. Rose took a deep breath, glancing to her right where Thomas sat in the front row, offering an encouraging "on." Beside him was her mother, looking healthier than she had in years, her eyes bright with pride. On her mother's other side sat Howard, his usually serious face softened by a rare smile. Thank you all for coming today, Rose began, her voice stronger than she expected. 6 months ago, I was serving coffee at Sunnyside Diner trying to figure out how to pay my mom's medical bills and keep the lights on. Today I'm standing before you as the Director of Community Outreach for the Blackwell Foundation, about to open a center that will help thousands of people who are facing the same struggles I once did. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some were familiar from her days at the diner, regulars who had become friends, co-workers who had supported her through tough times. Joey the cook had even been hired as the center's cafeteria manager, ensuring that nutritious meals would be available to everyone who came through their doors. Many of you have asked how this happened, how a waitress with no college degree ended up running a multi-million-dollar community center. It's a story that seems too strange to be true. Rose smiled, remembering the days after Thomas's revelation. How she'd carried that check in her pocket for 3 days, afraid to cash it, afraid it would bounce, afraid it was all some elaborate prank. How she'd finally taken the plunge and called the number on Thomas's business card, half expecting a disconnected line. The truth is, this center exists because of a simple act of kindness. For months, I shared my employee meal with a man I thought was homeless. It wasn't a grand gesture, just eggs and toast that cost me an hour's wages. I did it because my grandmother always taught me that we rise by lifting others. She gestured toward the building behind her. What I didn't know was that the man I was helping was actually Thomas Blackwell, founder of Blackwell Technologies. He was conducting a social experiment, trying to see how people would treat him if they thought he had nothing to offer. The crowd murmured with interest. The local paper had run a small story when the center was first announced, but most people didn't know the full details. Thomas offered me this job, not because I had the right credentials or connections, but because I treated him with dignity when I thought he couldn't do anything for me in return. He saw something in that simple act that he wanted at the heart of this foundation: the recognition that every person has value, regardless of their circumstances. Rose smiled at Thomas, who nodded back, his eyes suspiciously bright. When he first offered me this position, I didn't think I was qualified. I'd never run anything bigger than the night shift at a diner. I'd never managed a budget beyond my own stretched paycheck, but Thomas and Howard insisted that my lived experience was exactly what the foundation needed. Someone who understood struggle firsthand and recognized the difference between help that lifts and help that simply maintains. She gestured to the building behind her. This center isn't about charity, it's about opportunity. Inside, you'll find job training programs, child care for working parents, healthcare services, financial literacy classes, and educational support. Every program is designed not just to help people through tough times, but to give them the tools to build better futures. The sun shifted slightly, casting a warm glow across the gathering. Rose noted how different her life was now compared to 6 months ago. Her mother had moved to Portland and was receiving specialized treatment that had dramatically improved her condition. Rose herself had started taking night classes to finish her social work degree, though Thomas insisted it wasn't necessary for her position. The lesson here isn't about a magical rescue by wealth, Rose continued. It's that we never know the ripple effects of our actions. That person you help today might be in a position to change your life tomorrow, or they might go on to help dozens of others. Kindness creates its own kind of wealth that has nothing to do with money. She nodded to an assistant standing nearby, who handed her a large pair of ceremonial scissors. Today, as we cut this ribbon and officially open the Blackwell Community Center, I invite all of you to be part of this circle of kindness. Whether you come here seeking help or offering it, you'll find a place that recognizes your worth beyond your circumstances. Rose stepped away from the podium to approach the large red ribbon stretched across the center's entrance. Thomas rose from his seat to join her, along with Howard and her mother. Before we cut this ribbon, Thomas said, taking the microphone, I want to share something I've learned from Rose over these past months. Success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back. For years, I built companies and amassed wealth, thinking that was the definition of achievement. It took pretending to have nothing to realize how empty that measure of success really was. He turned to Rose with genuine respect in his eyes. This center isn't my legacy, it's hers, because while I provided the funding, Rose has provided the heart. She's the one who insisted our programs include childcare, so single parents can attend job training. She's the one who made sure our cafeteria serves 3 meals daily with no questions asked. She's the one who created a transportation program, so people without cars could still access our services. Thomas handed the microphone back to Rose, who felt tears pricking at her eyes. None of us get through life alone, she said simply. We all need a hand sometimes. This center is about making sure that hand is there when you need it most. Together, they cut the ribbon as the crowd applauded. As people began moving into the building for tours, Rose found herself standing beside Thomas, watching the community stream into the center that would help so many. You know, Thomas said quietly, when I started this experiment, I was looking for something I felt I'd lost, a connection to humanity beyond business transactions. I never expected to gain a business partner and friend. Rose smiled, remembering the first time she'd set a plate of eggs in front of a man she thought was homeless. And I never expected serving coffee would lead to all this. Funny how life works out. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Your grandmother was right. We do rise by lifting others. I just never realized that I'd be the one being lifted. As they walked into the building together, Rose felt a sense of completion. The struggling waitress and the billionaire in disguise had both found something they needed through their unlikely friendship. And now, through this center, thousands of others would have the chance to find what they needed too. Not just assistance, but dignity, opportunity, and the chance to write a new chapter in their own stories. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest acts of kindness, even something as simple as a plate of eggs and toast served with compassion.